you'll press the orange. Yeah, press that button, and it should say recording. And you went on TikTok, you went on live on mine too, my TikTok.
Yep, you're live.
Awesome.
Live. Unable to connect.
That's YouTube there.
And then you should scoot your chair closer to me.
Live, perfect.
Are you on Wi-Fi on this one?
Should be. Let's not worry about it. Yeah, let's just not worry about it. Let's just go without. Is it right?
Ready?
Yeah. We're already live.
Good deal. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is a very, very, very special day because if you guys don't know who's sitting beside me, this is actually Attorney Noah Downing, okay? I'm going to let him talk a little bit about what he does, but it's very important that we understand this today because I'm thankful that they're actually in the state of Georgia, so, they have made time to come and meet with me and let me interview, interview and just learn a little bit more about what he's doing and how important it is in the time and the climate that we're living in, okay? So my name is Derrick Williamson. As you guys know me, I'm the young farmer out of Georgia that's been in a brutal legal battle for years trying to regain access to my farm. So when it comes to judicial corruption and governments not following oaths of office, not abiding by the Constitution, ultimately hurting families and individuals, it's a big deal to me. And out of everything that I've seen across the board, I've only seen one man, one individual that has said, understand me clearly, to those that practice corruption, there's accountability, and we need to align to the Constitution of the United States. Is when judges, police officers, and government officials
need to know that what happened
move outside of that is when we begin to have issues. So, Tanoa, man, so good to see you today, brother, man. It's a pleasure. I appreciate you spending time to let me interview and just talk with you today, man. And just want to start out here, man. Just let everybody know, because I also have a lot of people on my side. I'm actually filming, and we're going to clip some content as well. That just want to know, tell us who you are.
Yeah. So first off, let me go ahead and provide just a little clarification. Yeah. I'm not an attorney. I'm actually an advocate. Those are two absolutely opposing things. Gotcha. Okay. So an attorney goes through what's known as adjudicative law. They learn about the adjudication process. So they learn about ordinances, statutes, customs, judgment rules, all these laws that remove freedom, because that's what they're in the business of, is removing freedom. So I'm a substantive law, right? The exact opposite, the substantive law, which is the substance or the spirit of law. I went to George Washington University, got my master's there, my first master's there. And so what I do is I study nothing but the Constitution. That's it. And so I learned all the laws that set free. I'm in the business of restoring freedom, and attorneys in the business of removing freedom. I'm the exact opposite. I'm an attorney, I'm an advocate. An advocate is one who speaks on behalf of others. An attorney is one who acts on behalf of others.
I'm glad you clarified that, because I know sometime, I believe it was on one of the Fox News networks, also referred as an attorney. Very interesting. I'm glad that you made sure to help everybody understand that.
So the Fox News, I've never identified myself as an attorney. I wouldn't identify myself as an attorney because, first off, I don't want to be one. I'm not in the business of destroying this nation like they are. So, let's go ahead and just lay it out there, because a lot of people are asking the question about, or talking about the Bar Association and how it's the British accreditation registry, and how Great Britain has seeped its way here into America. And let me just say that the reason why that is because an attorney is an administrative officer of the court. If you were to read the Corpus Secundum, which is the attorney's handbook, one of the first things it says is that an attorney is an administrative officer of the court. Now, what is administrative officer? Well, in order to understand that, you need to learn what administrative law is. So, to understand that, you've got to look at the three branches of government and the separation of power. So, the first branch of government, Article 1, is the legislative branch, right? Clause 1, Article 1 says all legislative powers vested in the Congress of the United States, consisting of a Senate and House of Representatives. So legislative power is the power to make, amend, or destroy law. So the first branch of government, the legislative branch, they make, amend, or destroy law. It's the only branch of government that can make law, right? The second branch of government, Article 2, is the executive branch. Their role is to enforce the law. They are law enforcement. They don't make law, they make orders, executive orders. But orders are not law because the president is a servant to the people, not above the people. So what the president creates is actually orders, and orders can only affect those that can be ordered, which would be members of the executive branch, okay? Now the third branch of government is the judicial branch, Article 3. That is known as the administrative branch because they're there to administer the laws, right? So an administrative officer of the court falls under the judicial branch. That's why an attorney goes to judge-made rulings. And in the case of the judicial branch, once again, they don't make law either. They make rulings, judge-made rulings. But rulings is not law, which is actually the foundation of the litigation that we're working here. Because judges for 243 years here in America have believed that they make law, even though here in America, the people of the United States did not delegate the authority for judges to create law. We didn't do that. That's an English judicial philosophy, because in England, they have a monarchy. And that king, he then did delegate his authority to create law to his agents, the judges. Therefore, in England, the judges do speak the law. Here in America, they don't. Although that's the problem that we've encountered here, is that when judges create rulings and then they erroneously and unconstitutionally call it law, case law, well, here's a problem. Judges don't have the authority to legislate here in America, and we need to get this addressed because for 243 years, we've been under the belief that judges create law, and what judges say is the law, and that's not a world that we were meant to live in because we, here in America, we did not delegate that authority, and we control our own destiny because we, the people, create the law through the legislative branch. So that's actually exactly what we're fighting.
No, that's very interesting because I believe that a lot of people, if they're tracking on this, we know that when a judge creates a ruling or makes a ruling based off their discretion, you're right. How laws are created, we have a whole legislative branch too that is elected officials that represent the people, and when laws come into place, the people push those, and there's a process. Yeah. So anytime a judge, quote unquote, oversteps and creates a quote unquote law, then we know that's directly not in alignment with the Constitution.
Right.
Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in law, there's a hierarchy, right? Just like anything else, there's a hierarchy. So there's a hierarchy of law, and let's just say what that is. So here in America, the foundation is supposed to be the Constitution of the United States of America. That's the main body of law. That's the foundation. Everything is to derive from it here in America. The next would be what would be treaties. It's a much bigger area of law, but nonetheless, it would be treaties. Above that would be what you call statutes, right? And ordinances, customs, and so on. That's all what we call positive law. It's law in a written form that was created by a body of men with the constituted authority to be able to create law. Now, above that is this massive body of alleged law called common law. Common law is also known as judge-made rulings. However, case law, which would be the result of a judge-made ruling, is the lowest form. It's the absolute lowest form. And the reason why is because constitutionalism is based upon suffrage. The people vote. So it takes an authentic act of the people in order to amend the Constitution of the United States or to change it, because we have a rigid Constitution with very, very specific ways in which we would change it or alter it. Right? And we would go to the special amending procedure of Article 5 to determine what that is. But at the end of the day, if it requires the majority of the people of the United States in order to amend the Constitution of the United States, then that would mean that the opposite of constitutionalism would be one single man imposing his will upon the rest of the nation, which is judge-made rulings. So when judges make law, what they're able to do is they're able to alter or amend or destroy the Constitution of the United States through their own social, political, or public policy, which is, of course, again, the opposite of constitutionalism. A good example is this. If the Constitution is meant to be the foundation, right, and judges are meant to go to it because they swore fidelity with and to it as a result of their oath, then when I go into a courtroom and I say, Judge, my rights have been violated, where does that judge go to determine whether or not my rights were violated? Does he go to the Constitution of the United States, or does he go to a judge-made ruling? He goes to a judge-made ruling. He goes to the opposite of that which he's supposed to go to.
Case law is what they call it. Right?
Case law, right? But once again, case law is a fallacy because a judge cannot legislate. A judge cannot create law here in America. So when a judge makes a ruling, judge-made ruling, and then calls it law, that's not law. That's unconstitutional because there's a separation of powers that limits the judiciary from being able to create law. So what we have here is, of the first 28 United States Supreme Court justices that served on our court, 22 of them owned their own slaves, right? 22. These were men that had a desire to proliferate the slavery institution, right? And so they put into place a number of rulings that was actually designed to protect their property, the slaves. And as a result, today, we find ourselves in a situation that's eerily similar to slavery back then, because we've actually created and codified the legality of slavery right here in our own laws. That's the irony that we have to deal with every day. And I know that a lot of people might say, well, hang on now, Tana, well, what are you saying? We got slavery. That was outlawed after the Civil War, and that's not true. It's not true. All right? And the reason why is because we went and we fought a war. 600,000 lives were lost in the Civil War. And then immediately after that, we enacted a provision, an amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It's the 13th Amendment. And the American people were told that this was to abolish slavery. And so while we were sitting and celebrating and saying, oh, the war's over, slavery's gone, the 13th Amendment does not say you can't have slavery. Let's be honest. What the 13th Amendment says is it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as a punishment for crime. And the moment you say except, it means that you can have slavery, but we have to call it justice from now on. And so as a result, these states have realized the tens of billions of dollars that they can make up the forced involuntary servitude of the weakest and most vulnerable in our society in this institution that we would call a sweatshop in China, but a prison here in America. This is not justice because we've had an 800% increase in the prison population in 30 years. What is driving that but for the states desiring to create a for-profit business for the direct benefit of the state and employ that business with people that they can force into involuntary servitude by simply labeling a criminal. But the problem is that the 13th Amendment made the state the slave owner. Because if you can be enslaved, you can be forced into involuntary servitude as a result of a punishment for a crime, who determines whether or not you're a criminal? The state. Who is profiting off of that involuntary servitude? The state. Let me give you an example. The state of Washington, in its a provision in its Constitution, Article 2, Section 18 says, Congress shall provide for the working of inmates in for-profit businesses for the direct benefit of the state. So the state of Washington has created a for-profit business, and it directly benefits the state, and they employ the labor through the prison system. I have Afghans down in Florida right now who are charged in we'll get to that in a moment, but who are sitting in prison and who have been forced into involuntary servitude with a contract that the state of Florida has with General Dynamics, who just so happens to be a defense contractor. And those prisoners, they build the chipset for General Dynamics fighter jets. They don't get paid a cent to do that, not 1 cent. The state of Florida gets paid for the labor from General Dynamics, but not the prisoners, right? Now, we also have another defense contractor down in Florida that contracts with the state of Florida called Northrop Grumman. And they also contract with the state of Florida to bring prisoners in to answer their help desk phones, right? And these prisoners don't get paid 1 cent, not 1 cent to do that. State of Florida does, but not the prisoner because of the contract that exists. That's not justice, that's slavery. We have the female prison in Georgia that Georgia has contracted with Victoria's Secret to bring the females in to sew tags on their underwear. These prisoners don't get paid a cent to do that. The state of Georgia does, but not the state, not the prisoner. We have McDonald's that's contracted with the state of Texas to bring prisoners in to make their hamburgers. Once again, don't get paid. We have over 900 prisoners that fight fires every single year in the state of California. They get paid $5 a day for the work that they do, saving millionaire and billionaires' homes. This is not justice. This is slavery. And so to understand where we're at, we've got to accept and acknowledge what is really going on. We've got to really look at it honestly and take an honest look at it. And when we do, then we can understand the motivations of this system. And once we understand the motivations of it, then we understand that it's got to go away. This is not the way that we are to treat our people. And we've got to fix this. And so, one of the things that I like to, because I'm deep in the history of our country and where we've gotten to today historically, but this all started from the very, very beginning. I have great admiration for our founding fathers. I do. George Washington did some amazing things, had some great, amazing ideas, as did Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and these other men. But the problem is that our founders, they said a bunch of things, had some amazing words, inspired a whole nation to rise up with pitchforks and stand against the most powerful military known to mankind, a military that's never lost in the battlefield, and they won, right, from that inspiration. But the problem that I have is that we've got to look at words and actions, right? We've got to make sure that those are congruent with one another. Because I can say that I'm an honorable person, but if my behavior is not honorable, I'm not honorable. So when we look at Mr. Washington, when we look at Mr. Jefferson, we look at Mr. Madison, we say, did these people believe that all men were actually equal, such as they stated? The answer is no, they didn't. Because when it came right down to it, they didn't release what they called their property. So they didn't create a criminal justice system, because this system is not built upon the just principles of all men being equal. They created a criminal enslavement system because they placed slavery directly at the foundation of this institution. So I have to say that those men that we believe were, amazing, they weren't telling us the truth. And so if we want to fix this problem, we've got to eliminate the slavery institution once and for all in its finality, rip it out from the very roots of it, and put into place something that the people can actually believe in. Because I don't think that this is what the people wanted. It was not what they agreed upon, and it certainly isn't what the people, I believe, would like to see moving forward. So what I'm trying to do, first off, we need to make ourselves aware of the true nature of this system. Ask ourselves, is this really what we want? And if it's not, then let's take the effort right now to put into place the system that we were promised and that we had envisioned. Yeah.
Hey, you covered a lot of ground, brother. A lot of ground. One thing I wanted to highlight, you began to talk about, if I'm correct, it was the 13th Amendment, and how we know that we talked about how it went from, obviously, it was a quote-unquote freeing of slaves, of African Americans, but then it seemingly, the government went and implemented that for-profit business that we know as a quote-unquote justice system that will still procure human bodies to do work without having, without them having quote-unquote rights. Yeah. I think it's something that the people need to hear, that you need to address, okay? A lot of people may say, well, okay, they're in prison, they're incarcerated, they had their full due process and they deserve whatever that looks like. But granted, we know, I'm a firm believer that even on the inside, they have a responsibility. Those are human beings that serving their time. They do not deserve death sentences by their peers. There's a lot of issues there. But this is what I want you to highlight on, because I want you to elaborate on this. A lot of people that are incarcerated based off the Constitution, I think you know where I'm going with this, based off the Constitution, there is a procedural process that's outlined that most of these people that we speak of, they did not get. Yeah. So I want you to help us understand. Tell me about that due process. You're going to get into it, but about an indictment of a grand jury. We've only seen this indictment of a grand jury officially pushed really, obviously with President Trump. But by constitutional law, it dictates that every human being on this soil has that right. Did I miss something?
No.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
So the Constitution of the United States of America is the overarching requirements that every state must follow. Absolutely. There's no denying that, right?
Absolutely.
So to what purpose would our Constitution be? To what reason did the people enact a law and reduce that law to writing if those that are bound to be restrained by that law are able to exceed that law by typical state legislation. So in other words, states do not have the authority to be able to create their own alternative legislation, substitute it for the guarantees of the Constitution of the United States, and then go out and enforce that against the people and the Constitution of the United States of America. That would obviously be an unconstitutional situation. So the Constitution of the United States establishes the procedures and processes that the states must follow to adjudicate a crime. In other words, to find someone guilty. If you don't follow those procedures, there cannot be guilt. Because if government is acting unlawfully, where there is unlawfulness, it produces an unlawful outcome. So, again, the process actually starts with, just as Derrick said, a grand jury. This is Clause 1 of Amendment 5. So Clause 1 of Amendment 5 initiates the criminal adjudication process. It's what determines whether or not a person can be arrested or not arrested. And what it says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. That's clear. You have to have an indictment by a grand jury before arresting someone and holding them over for a capital or an infamous crime. Now, what are those crimes? The first is a capital crime, right? That is any crime that's punishable by a death. That's pretty easy, right? Infamous is a little bit harder. You got to dig into the law to determine what an infamous crime is. An infamous crime is any crime punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment in a penitentiary, right? But it's not the amount of time that you get sentenced to, it's the amount of time that you can be sentenced to, because you cannot be held to answer without an indictment by a grand jury. So if you pled guilty to a crime that you could have gotten 3 years, but you only got 3 months, it is still an infamous crime, requiring an indictment by a grand jury before holding you over for that offense. Okay? That's pretty clear. We'll come back to the purpose of the grand jury in 1 second. However, the state of Washington, and that's just one state, it's the state that we're in active litigation against. It's the primary respondent in the case that we're working here. And it's the only one we have to beat. But the state of Washington, Article 1, Section 26 of its inferior state constitution says, no grand jury shall be drawn or summoned in any county. So we have a United States constitutional provision that says that you must have an indictment by a grand jury before arresting someone and holding them over for a felony or a gross misdemeanor, whatever that might be, any crime that's punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment in a penitentiary. However, the state of Washington has a provision that says we will not convene a grand jury. No grand jury shall be drawn or summoned in any county. That particular provision functions directly to the contrary of the Constitution of the United States of America, and as a result, every single time that the state pursues a criminal adjudication, in other words, arrests someone, they are arresting someone unconstitutionally, which means that the judgments that they are believing that they're obtaining through the alleged trials or the alleged plea bargains, none of it is valid because it all derives from an unconstitutional arrest because the states didn't follow the very clear procedures and processes codified in the Constitution of the United States for the adjudication of crime. And so Washington isn't, unfortunately, the only state that's doing this. There are actually 13 states that do not conduct a grand jury, including the state of Connecticut, who removed the grand jury from their constitution in 1984, despite it being required. That's also the state of North Dakota and South Dakota. They removed it around the same time. The state of Pennsylvania as well. These are states that are acting in direct willful defiance of the codified limitations that they have contained within the Constitution of the United States of America. This is an issue that we must get addressed because today, right now, there are more than 700,000 people currently in prison here in America on direct facial constitutional violations, meaning that there is no judgment because that judgment is directly in conflict with the Constitution of the United States of America. If you make an unconstitutional arrest because you didn't follow the proper procedures to perform that arrest, that means that everything that derives from that arrest must also be unconstitutional because it's tainted by the illegality of the way in which it was obtained. If you perform an unconstitutional arrest, then you do not have a constitutional outcome. You have no outcome whatsoever because the state has lost jurisdiction the moment that they chose to act in willful defiance of the Constitution of the United States of America. So that's the situation that we're in. Now it gets much bigger, and we'll get to that in a moment. But let me just be clear. I'm not saying that these are good people. I'm not saying that these are lawful people, but what I'm saying is that these are all rightful people who had rights that they were guaranteed by their birthright, limitations that the states had in preserving their liberty by limiting the powers of those governments, and those governments have clearly abridged those rights. And as a result, I'm not saying that these people are all innocent. I don't know, but what I am saying is that they're not guilty, because guilt's a process, and the states have not followed that process.
Wow, Tone, that was a lot. You covered a lot of ground really quickly, too. I love it. So, just to recap a little bit, we talked about how, according to the United States Constitution, right, that is the supreme law of the land. That is what everything in this country is governed by, and it's the backdrop of all how we do, quote-unquote, day-to-day operations and procedure protocols, legal proceedings. Everything is dictated there. According to what you're telling me, you're saying that Washington, it's coming out of Washington State, there was an alternative set of, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say local legislation that began to, quote unquote, claim or make an attempt to supersede the Constitution that very clearly says you have to have an indictment of a grand jury. But granted, with the state of Washington being made aware of, being very clear of that, they not only were acknowledgement of that constitutional mandate that has to happen, they went and they still developed this alternative legislation that is in direct conflict with the United States true constitutional law of the land. So we run into an immediate issue really quickly, really fast, because we know that if there's two contrary ways of doing things, and the Constitution has made it very clear on what procedure looks like to quote unquote cut a step, we know it ultimately harms an individual that is, it was meant to protect, but then it also benefits the state versus being in alignment to protect the people or giving them the their full process. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. So, and now we're looking at this. So we see Washington has done that. Now we're saying that what makes what you do so important and what makes what you do so dynamic is the fact that other states have, like you called out, multiple states have also followed that guideline and created their own, for lack of better terms, I want to call it their state constitution versus the United States Constitution. Yeah. So they are implementing their state constitution on human life versus following the federal United States government, we the people constitution. Yeah. So we know that this is a very deep-rooted issue, man. We're talking about some very deep stuff. There's a lot of families, a lot of people that are affected by this, right? When you're after a remedy, for a lot of people, you have affidavits that you collected from thousands of families, millions. Correction, millions of families that, to know it down, right, has affidavits from, right, that very clearly state that they were not given their constitutional right, okay? So this is the thing. We know when it comes to government, you know this better than anybody, and I've learned from my personal experience. When government makes mistakes, instead of fixing it, they keep on trying to either buck you harder, rebel against and cover up what they've done, and they just go tooth and nail. Yeah. So we know that it's very clear that there will be that Washington and other states are doing this because they can agree. I've watched a lot of your content, Mr. Downing. I've not seen anyone oppose you as wrong. Saying or tell you that, listen, that's not found in the Constitution. No one says that. But we know that they revert after they say that, then they say that this is the way we're doing it, this is the way that it's been done, and we don't have the ability or we're not going to change what we're doing. Yeah. So your case, you've been able to cover a lot of ground across the United States, man. You've served, and then also Jessica Saxton, she's been able to go as well. And you guys have went before commissioners, city councils, and a lot of different places. So tell me, the heart of your campaign. This is very big because I believe that I don't care what the allegation was according to the Constitution, right? That person should have had the proper due process. They were entitled to something, and to a grand jury indictment. Right. We're not seeing it happen.
So the grand jury is an introduction in. It's a facial constitutional violation, and it's not going to solve all the problems that we have with our country, but it'll get the country talking about the issues. Because as long as government ignores the issues, we're never going to resolve them. Right? And so, just like I said in the beginning, that when we look at George Washington, we say, was he really being honest with us when he said that he believed that all men were equal, right? I mean, and once again, like a lot of people have said, well, that's because they didn't see black people as equal, right? They didn't see them as people. They only saw them as property. And I can't subscribe to that argument. That's the argument that I hear from a lot of people but I can't subscribe to that. And the reason why I can't is that when George Washington died, he released his slaves, right? If he only saw them as property, he would have just willed them down to his grandchild, in his will, as any other property. He kept the slaves so long as they were profitable to him, but the day that he died, in his will, he released them and set them all free. And it wasn't just him. So did Thomas Jefferson, so did James Madison, right? These men, when they died, they released them. So I can't subscribe to the belief, the argument that he didn't see them as equal, right? But when the founders say that we create all men equal, right, and then you choose to not actually do what God commands you to do and make all men equal, you didn't create a justice system. You lied to the people, and so, So the indictment issue is something that will get us talking about it. Another thing is that we go overseas and we preach to these foreign nations that they need to set their people free, right? And we were just in Afghanistan talking about how we need to free these people from the oppression that's overcome them. And the problem is that any foreign policy that's in conflict with domestic policy is rendered ineffective, and we are rightfully labeled hypocrites. Before we can go into another nation and say, set your people free, we need to first take a look at ourselves and see if what we're practicing here at home is consistent with what we're preaching overseas. And it's not. Because here in America, we have 5% of the world's human population, but 26% of the world's prison population. That doesn't sound like a free nation, right? Here in America, we have had an 800% increase in the prison population in the last 30 years. That doesn't sound like a free nation, right? And so, we have to take an honest look at our own domestic policy and say, are we effective with doing overseas? Yeah. Same guys.
My apologies.
Oh, you're right.
I thought it was on. I should have been on mute.
They might. It might mess up the sound.
Let me go ahead. Oh, if I mute, yeah.
What it isn't until it goes to sound will come back on. Guys, if you can't hear us,
we're streaming on a lot of platforms. Everybody, we have DJIs and a lot of different cameras here, so we're gonna be putting this content out. So sorry to cut you off. Cut you off. It was on. Go ahead.
But so the first step to any recovery is you've got to start to talk about you've got to acknowledge the issue, and that's what we have to do. We have to acknowledge this issue. So, but there's this indictment issue. It's just the beginning. It's just a starting point for us to be able to start this discussion. But again, what we're doing here in America is not consistent with a free nation. It's not consistent with constitutionalism. And so we need to take an honest look at the system and decide, is this really what we want? And if it's not, then we have an opportunity here to start over. Because it doesn't matter what the system does. These people that are currently imprisoned, they're unconstitutionally on judgments that are wholly and factually void without any force or effect, because the state and the government abridge the constitutional obligations that they have. And so, this is a great opportunity for us to take an honest look at the system and say, do we want to take this a different direction? I don't know if we're going to have another opportunity like this. This is huge. This is the biggest civil rights case that weasily hands down that we had. But I do want to say that we're covering a lot more than just the prisoners, right? Because I've had a hard time, because for a couple of years now I've talked about prisoners and setting them free and all these other things, and most people, they don't like that. They say, oh well, that's a prisoner, he deserves to be there, and and so on. And there's not much empathy for prisoners, right?
True.
But the problem is that I needed to start at the beginning, right? because that prisoner was once a child that was hurt, right? And the trauma was inflicted upon him that changed the trajectory of his life. Because when you remove a child from the love and care of their family, when you break down the familial unit, right, and that child grows up in the absence of a parent, that child then has an 85% likelihood of going to prison over their lifetime. And today we have currently over 12 million children currently removed from their families in a state system under CPS or whatever your state calls it. So we have 12 million children right now today that are having trauma inflicted upon them. It's not their fault, who are going to grow up tomorrow and be an adult that has an 85% likelihood of going to prison, and that trauma is not being healed. And the system says, well, look at that monster, look what they did, look at that prisoner. And we don't understand, or we don't consider the fact that something happened that destroyed the familial unit that has been leading to this criminality. For a person to become the person that God created them to be, you must have the love of a mother and a father. The dynamic of the family unit is so essential to the structure and fabric of our society that if you break it down and you remove the father from the household through mass incarceration, through chattel slavery, through, easy divorce, any one of these things, when you break down the family unit, what you do is you result in a society that cannot live within the parameters of civil structure, because these children don't have what they need to become what God created them to be, and as a result, they become what the system says that they are, and now society just looks at them and says, you're nothing but a monster that needs to pay for the things that you've done. So this last year, Jess has really been helping me a lot with rebuilding the person from the beginning, talking about the child and what happened to the child, and then the product that the system has. So, this issue of criminality, we're never going to solve it from the way we're trying to do it, by going out and arresting the people, right? Because if our country is being led by criminals, then we're going to produce an environment of criminality. That's the direction they're going to lead us, and then we'll produce a society of criminals. So, these children, we've got to start with them. We've got to start with the preservation of the family. We've got to protect the integrity of the familial unit. And we individually, personally, need to say, am I going to be a man or woman of honor? Am I going to do the things I say that I'm going to do? We need to understand that our greatest treasure is not a bank or money. Our greatest treasure is these children. And these 12 million children that are currently growing up right now today, 10 million of them statistically are going to end up in a prison system that already has 2.9 million prisoners. And at 2.9 million prisoners, we have 16 times more prisoners than the next closest industrialized nation right now today. So that means that in one single generation, on the track that we're on, statistically from the harm and trauma we're inflicting upon these children, we are going to see an increase from 16 times more prisoners than the next closest industrialized nation to 58 times more in one single generation. We've got to stop this. And the way we stop this is by healing the trauma that the system has inflicted upon the people, and that's healing the trauma of all children. I don't care if that child's 50 years old or that child's 2 years old. These children deserve to be given the love and care that they need to become the person that they were created to be, and that means that we need to head this off very, very quickly.
I see, one thing you pivoted. We went from talking about prisoners and the government's impact and with the prison system and with quote unquote citizens. And then now we transition to talking about, for lack of better terms, state of Georgia, CPS, Child Protective Services. And for those of you that don't know, when we say CPS or protection agencies, or youth protection agencies, things like that, those are the government entity that is over the physical process and procedures, removing a child from his family and placing that child into the quote unquote, for lack of better terms, the state. All right. So, Tano was talking a little bit about that. One thing I like that you did, you took it a step back. I like it. And it's so easy to talk about when that person, is charged with criminal charges, whatever they're being accused of, they stand before that process at that time. There's always a backstory. We know, like you said, according to statistics, those youth and young people or children that grew up through the CPS being a quote unquote ward of the state or by in state's custody do not receive a lot of what they need, because it was the original design is that mother and father are supposed to be nurturing components and give that child what that child needs to be a quote unquote productive citizen. Yeah. We know that over 12, like you said, 12 million kids are not in that perspective. But we know this too, the state has incentive to remove children from the familiar family, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of incentive there, and the state, in a lot of states, have moved aggressively to remove children from their families versus the implication of programs and abilities to help, to aid, a resource and aid the family to keep that child. The state, instead of doing the proper avenues to try to, with the mindset, let's keep this family together, because that's the ease, that's going to be the best route. As a lot of people know, I work in wildlife, I work with animals. When it comes to wildlife rehabilitation, okay, it is not ideal for us humans, right, to have to be the quote unquote parent to the animal, all right? Sometimes we have to, because the animal's parent may have died or something may have happened, but ideally, if you can get that animal back reunited, if the bird fell out of the nest, it's better to get the bird back in the nest with his parent, with his parents, or back with the family. If we always tell families, when you find an animal, go sometimes, mother deer, leave their deer, and they'll be back. It's best that that animal is raised by their parents. We can't, there's no alternative to that, that's so much effective. The same thing I think with children too, with structure, with help, right? The state should be helping the families to keep that unit together. They're going to get a strong fortification. Another thing that I'm pretty sure many therapists and psychiatric doctors and others may agree with you on is the fact that when that child is with their families, it begins to stop a lot of mental health issues that will derive from them being lonely, broken, abandoned, stripped. There's a lot of things that happen from that process, right? Yeah. So I agree with you 100% there. Starts back with, the home, start back with the children. I believe the state's ability, I think that based off, like we talked about Washington earlier. I'm about to ask you about something, but we talked about Washington, how they created that alternative legislation that states began to follow, ultimately benefiting the states, not helping the people. I believe that mentality and that mindset permeated through government as a whole. Instead of them wanting to protect the people that they serve, it went to how can we gain as an institute, how can we gain as a business, how can we gain as a governing body, and it forgot the focus of what really matters most. I want to talk about something real quick to know.
Can I hit?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
So just first off, children all through history have always been a financial generator. All through history, going back to Rome and Greek, and the children have always been a financial generator, and ours is no different. Just as he said, we've got the Title 40 money, which actually pays the state federal funding out of the Social Security Act for every single child that's removed from love and care of their parents, right? And if you adopt them out, the state even gets more money. So now there's financial incentives to do this. And a lot of people talk about that and say, well, here's the problem. And what we're not talking about is the long-term financial incentive in what they're doing. The whole Title 4D funding is short-term incentive. You get, $100,000 per child that you adopt out. That's one thing. But look at the long-term financial incentive in doing it. If we have 12 million children right now today in the CPS system who is getting trauma inflicted upon them because the state is putting them into abusive environments, unloving environments, and so on, sexually deviant environments, which we're all very aware that this is happening. When the state does that, right, and creates that trauma in that child, and that trauma then the child then grows up and becomes an adult, that trauma again causes them to have an 85% likelihood of going to prison. And now you have a self-sustaining, long-term financial generator that's feeding into the system, right? This is their strategy. This is what they're doing. This is, and we saw the same thing happen with chattel slavery. The breakup and disruption of the family unit, which we saw in chattel slavery, where they came in and they would break up the families and take the children. It was intended initially as a mechanism for fear to make them be compliant to their slave owners. But at the end of the day, the breakdown and destruction of the family unit was not an inconsequential cause of the chattel slavery. It was actually intended because if you don't have the structure of the family, you don't have the stability that's necessary to be able to, to live. There's an old saying that a family can survive without a nation, but the nation cannot survive without the family. So when you create the fear in the child by removing them from the love and care of their mother and father, then that fear is going to drive them into instability, right? It's going to drive them to not know who they are. If you look at the structure of the family, it's really interesting how God designed the family to be. So a mother and a father both are equally as important in the familial unit, right? Neither one of them is interchangeable. Don't ever get me wrong in what I'm saying here. So for the male child, he gets his image from his father. He learns how to be a man from his dad, right? So absent the father, that male child then grows up and he has a lack of sense of self. This is very well known. You can go read the DSM and it will tell you this. Now he has a great likelihood of suicide. He's not going to adjust well. He's going to end up, again, with an 85% likelihood of going to prison because he can't live within the parameters of the society that was created. For the female child, her first love is her father. She learns how to love from her father. So absent the father, she doesn't have the ability to build long-lasting relationships because she didn't get that love that she needed from her father. Her father is there to teach her how she is to love, the treasure that she actually is. So at the end of the day, the daughter, she learns how to love from her father. That's why the old saying is that a daughter will marry someone just like her father. Now the same can be said on the other side of the familial unit. So the daughter, she gets her image from her mother, right? She learns how to be a woman from her. Absent the mother, that daughter grows up without a sense of self, greater likelihood of suicide, and all these other things. And so, and the same with the male child. The male child learns how to love from his mother. That's where he learns love. That's why a man will marry someone just like his mother, is because the love that he gets from his mother is the love that he goes out and seeks. So to become the person that God created you to be, you must have the family dynamic there. Absent it, you have an individual that does not know how to live within the parameters of our society and has issues with self-esteem, self-awareness. So one of the things that we've also learned is looking at Native Americans in our own history here. The government didn't like the Native American culture. So what did they do? They removed the children from that culture. And when they removed the children from their own native heritage, we ended up losing an entire culture of people because they didn't know who they were. They were institutionalized, given white people names, put into white person school, removed from their mother and father. And as a result, guess what? Now we don't know that heritage anymore. It's been lost over time. And that was, again, is not an inconsequential intended action from our own government. And so this is why it's very important for us to preserve the family, because how can a person know who they are, where they come from, how they should live within society, but for being taught that by the two most important people within their life?
That's a lot to know. I agree with you, man. The family unit is really important, and you will see a massive attack against the family unit on a lot of sides, and definitely the political side as well too, man. A lot of attacks against the family unit. And as we covered earlier, when a child is with their family,
you need to know that what happened needed to happen this way.
More likely to be successful, to get the tools and the resources that it needs. And that doesn't mean that all families are perfect. Just because I believe we learn so much from nature. You hear me say all the time. There's certain parents in wildlife that that do some things a little bit tough for the baby sometimes, but it fares them well overall though. Sometimes a little bit of discipline, things like that. But that's a big controversial topic. But bottom line, the core of this is that a family unit must be protected, and the government as a whole should have strategies in place to make sure that the rippage of a child from their family was the absolute. In certain cases that we know that there's very exigent circumstances, it's a lot going on, that we know that there's certain cases where that is permissible. But to have it to the tune of 12 million, I can't see that. I don't believe that the state.
It's not. I mean, I deal with lots, thousands, tens of thousands of people I don't think I've met one that should have had the family destroyed. And I know that that's a difficult thing for people to grasp because they want to look at the system and say, oh, well, this system wouldn't go and destroy families, just arbitrarily or capriciously. But that's not true. It happens every single day. And the reason why, again, is the financial incentive in doing so. When we pay the CPS workers money to go out and find children and bring in hearsay allegations so that you can... The first act of our government should be the preservation of the family.
Absolutely.
Right? Not the last act.
Absolutely.
The government should not come in and say, okay, we're going to remove this child as our first order of business. That parent must be presumed to be fit to be a parent until government proves that they're unfit beyond a reasonable doubt. Right? The same burden of proof that the state should have in a criminal matter, they should have in a family matter as well. And so that's what we're trying to illustrate. That's one of the reasons why we're using the prisoner issue, is because in the case of prisoners, they are not being presumed innocent until proven guilty. And we can show the breakdown of due process that exists there because the judges receive an arbitrary allegation from a single source that hasn't been validated or verified, and the accused has never had an opportunity to confront those accusations, and now they're arresting them, bringing them into jail, treating as though they're guilty based upon that single set of information that's never been rebutted, right? So my point is that the judges in a criminal matter, they presume that these people are guilty based upon the accusation of a crime being committed, right? And now they lose their freedom and their rights and all these other things. They're put into a jail, treated as though they're guilty until they prove that they are innocent, right? So the presumption of innocence doesn't exist where the prosecutor must prove that you're innocent or guilty. It now has been shifted to where the defendant has to prove that they're innocent because they're already assumed to be guilty because someone has accused them of committing a crime, right? The same breakdown of due process exists within the family as well. They're coming in based upon a single set of allegations that's never been verified or validated. The parents have never had an opportunity to be able to confront those accusations against them because the state is doing it. And so then all of a sudden they are presumed to be unfit based upon the allegations that's been brought against them. In the case of the indictment by a grand jury, for instance, what is happening is that the state is charging the accused based upon what's called information. So what information is that the state has information that someone committed a crime. And then they take that information and they charge you with that crime based upon the information, right? You don't have an opportunity to be able to confront that information because that would be the purpose of the grand jury. Instead, the government collects the information, a law enforcement officer brings it to a judge and then says, Judge, I'd like to have this person arrested. That judge says, okay, sounds good, signs a warrant for arrest, and then they go out and arrest someone, but that person has never been given the opportunity to be able to be presumed innocent until proven guilty because someone said that they had committed a crime. They collected information on them, and now that person is taken into jail. Whether he's innocent or not, he's being deprived of certain rights that are guaranteed and protected by the Constitution of the United States. And now he is presumed guilty until he can go out and collect evidence to prove that he's innocent. This is a shift in the burden of proof where the prosecutor normally must prove that you're guilty, but instead you must prove that you're innocent. The same thing happens in the family court because these judges are interchangeable. If that's the behavior of a judge in a courtroom, in a criminal courtroom, that would be the same behavior of a judge in the family courtroom because they're all being trained and led by the same criminals, right? So if the criminal judge presumes that you're guilty because someone accused you of committing a crime, then in a family court, the judge presumes that you're unfit because someone accused you of you being unfit. And that someone is a government agent, an agent of the state, CPS or law enforcement or the sheriff's department. Someone within government says you're unfit because they have information that you are unfit. It is the same issue, exact same issue, which is why I'm able to use the indictment by a grand jury or absence thereof with prisoners to be able to manifest the same exact scenario to show this is what's happening in the family in the same manner, because the behavior of the judges are consistent regardless of whether they're a criminal issue or a family court issue. It's the same exact scenario.
I love it. I love it the way we talk about inmates, and we talk about their rights being deprived, and we transition. Some people say, okay, I get it, but I have a hard time connecting to a quote-unquote prisoner. We got that. Now we transition to children. Granted, when it comes to children in this climate right now, we know that there's a lot of very successful people that abuse children. But as the moral compass of most is to protect children. It should be. That's one of the most vital things. And as gatekeepers, as shepherds, as protectors, as public officials, you must protect the children, all right? And we transition from prisoners into children. Well, hopefully that touch down to where people can have an understanding that when a child is ripped from their family, that is no minimal thing. And then what's interesting about that is, according to statistics, based off the statistics, once that child is removed from their family, and then we see almost 80% probability, if I'm correct, that child will end up in the system. It's kind of like and it almost if the state is doing a short-term investment of removing the child, then a long-term investment of putting the child in the system forever. See, we see a flow. We see almost like a flow of money, a flow of deprivation rights. But the one thing that is really, really that we highlight is the fact that innocent people suffer, that were not given the opportunities that they could have possibly been given, or constitutional rights. So I want to
let me touch on that real quick, because first off, I'm going to say that every single one of these children, all 12 million of them, are innocent, right? They didn't do anything to be in the situation that they're in. So we're just going to say outright, every single one of them did not deserve what the state has done to them. We're going to say that first off. Now, the second thing I'm going to say is that when we get into the prisoner level, let me give you a couple statistics. So if you were to open up the Criminal Procedure Manual, right, the United States Criminal Procedure Manual, it's written by a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge. So this is a federal appellate judge. If you were to open up the preface and go down to the 4th paragraph, what it says most prosecutors across America agree that as much as 15% of the people in prison are innocent, but that is an acceptable deviance because our system isn't perfect. So we have a federal appellate judge that says, you know what? We all know that an inordinate amount of people in prison are innocent, but that's just luck of the draw, right? Because our system isn't perfect. I don't believe that it's acceptable to lock anyone innocent up in prison. Certainly not if you're not following the procedures and processes codified in the Constitution that's designed to protect the individual liberties of the people by limiting the powers of government. Don't blame the system for your incompetence or your laziness, and certainly don't blame it if innocence is in prison suffering, Miss Brown Jackson, because I know that Supreme Court Justice Brown Jackson, I know that you said just last year in one of your dissenting opinions that you're tired of the court's Doceam doctrine with regard to considering the innocence of prisoners. I'm going to tell you right now that I know 2.9 million people in prison that are pretty sick of it too, right? Especially if the system admits that 15% of people there are innocent, right? But that's okay because it's just luck of the draw. This isn't luck of the draw. Follow the procedures and we won't have them there. So we know that there's an inordinate amount of people. In fact, we have 2.9 million people currently in prison. We have 10 million people pre and post conviction within the system itself. Based upon those numbers alone, that would mean that we have more than 700,000 people currently innocent, suffering, despite the fact that they're innocent because the system accepts that as acceptable deviance. It's not acceptable deviance. We, the people, didn't say that you can lock up innocent people and then just throw away the key. We didn't allow that. Your camera just jumped down.
No, that's right.
Now there's one other statistic that you need cable here.
I think so. Let's see. No, okay, it's okay.
There's one other statistic that I want to bring up here. This statistic is so here in America, right? You're gonna probably need to plug that in, right?
Yeah, I'm about to plug. Yeah, I'll plug it in.
1 second, guys. Hang on here.
Everybody, 1 second, everybody. We having some technical
use this one right here. C cable, right?
Yes.
There you go.
Will it fit over here? Good. Let me see. I'm gonna go ahead and put it adder extender on it.
Get a little bit closer here.
Everybody, 1 second, you guys. We about to be right. All right, we're good. Actually, there we go. All right, she's back. She's okay. Get her turned back. Good. Yeah, I think we're gonna turn it back on. Get it back recorded. Power and off.
So there's one other statistic that I want to bring up, you guys.
I have a cousin that has been incarcerated for 44 years. The parole board denies the nature of the crime.
Denies the nature of the crime?
Yeah, that's what someone said. I didn't get a chance to read all of it.
So, in the late 70s, we lifted the moratorium on the death sentence, the death penalty here in America. So since the late 70s, right, when the death penalty was reinstated here in America, of the 1,500 people that this nation has put to death, 139 of them have been proven to have been innocent after they were murdered. That's a bad statistic. Of the remaining, another 186 were exonerated after being placed on death row. In other words, they were proven to have been factually innocent despite being found guilty. Those are not good numbers. So if we have a system that says that 15% of the people in prison are innocent, right? But yet we have 18% of the people that we know that were on death row that were factually innocent, I think that the numbers could be quite a little bit higher. And that's a scary, scary proposition right there. So yeah.
There we go. I'm about to be back on.
Okay.
Let me see. If not, I'm using the my other device to cover the rest of the interview, so we're good because it needs to charge up. So yeah, so we're good. We're yes, so everybody, sorry about that, but no, what you're saying is absolutely correct, man. We've covered a lot of ground, and one thing I want to go ahead and pivot a little bit. I want you to go ahead and define something for us so that we all understand as well. When we use the term grand jury, okay, most of us have been called in for jury duty once or twice, okay, or something similar. Help us understand what the importance of a grand jury is. Walk me through that. What's obviously is grand, so tell me a little bit about the importance of grand jury.
Yeah. So the jury is a two-part process, right? And if anybody wants to know a little bit better, there's a case, I believe from 1969, called Duncan versus Louisiana. And the United States Supreme Court describes the jury process. Now that particular case, what they were doing was they were incorporating the requirement or the restriction for the states to a petit jury. But they described the two-part process that goes into adjudicating a crime.
Right.
So the first step is a grand jury. The second step is often misunderstood. That's known as the petit jury. The grand jury, what it does is it's the very first step. The grand jury is the only thing that's in the process to protect the innocent from hasty or malicious charges by an overzealous prosecutor. So we have a system that says, 15% of people in prison are innocent. Well, the problem is that you remove the one thing that exists to protect the innocent from suffering. Because the purpose of the grand jury is to be a check on prosecutorial and judicial power. It was there to protect the innocent from hasty or malicious charges by an overzealous prosecutor. The purpose of the grand jury is to protect the accused from state action, especially when they are, in fact, innocent. So it's the grand jury that determines whether or not there's sufficient probable cause to assume that a crime has been committed. Before you can be arrested and held to answer for a serious crime, the state must prove to a neutral, unbiased decision maker that they have a case and that there's sufficient probable cause to assume that a crime was even committed. Absent that, you have a prosecutor that has unchecked and unrestrained power to be able to accuse you of anything that they want. Any arbitrary or capricious action or any information that they receive, they can say, you're guilty, and we're now going to put you into jail and deprive you of liberties, whether we believe it or not. In fact, we don't even have to investigate this crime or do anything, because we just know that you're guilty. It is a guilty until proven innocent scenario. Blackstone talks about this. So what's happening is, again, you're charged by way of information, right? In the state of Georgia here, the state of Georgia permits the prosecuting attorneys or the law enforcement police officers to charge by way of information or indictment by their discretion. In other words, the prosecuting attorney and law enforcement gets to decide whether or not they're going to take you in front of a grand jury to get an indictment, or they're just going to charge you by the information that they have against you. That is unconstitutional, because the Constitution requires the indictment. Furthermore, public officials cannot be permitted to be able to decide who has a constitutional right and who does not. That would be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, right? You can never create a law, state of Georgia, that directs your agents to disobey the Constitution, because that would be unconstitutional. The way in which you guys currently do it, where you permit your prosecuting attorney to decide whether or not to charge by information or indictment, is absolutely unconstitutional under the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, under the emolument violation, where you are paying a public official to commit a crime and violate the constitutional right. It's absolutely unconstitutional. But what happens with information is that someone will call up the police and say, hey, something happened to me. And then that police will take that information, they'll reduce it to writing in the form of an affidavit, right? And then that officer takes that affidavit and submits it to a judge and says, Judge, this is what happened. I'd like a warrant for this person's arrest. And that judge says, looks good to me, go ahead and arrest him. So then they issue an order for arrest. Or you're already detained and the officer just takes you directly in. But what happens with information is that your right to confront your accuser, it evaporates, because you can't put that information on the stand and cross-examine it, because information is presented as though it's fact. That's what an affidavit is it's fact, right? And any unrebutted affidavit is considered truth. So when the state doesn't give you an opportunity to rebut the accusation or rebut the affidavit, that affidavit is now submitted to the court as though it's truth, and truth is factual. You can't rebut that information. This creates what's known as an irrebuttable presumption of guilt. Now, an irrebuttable presumption of guilt is the presumption that you are guilty based upon the mere fact of being charged with a crime. If you're accused of committing a crime, you are now presumed guilty based upon the fact that someone accused you. Now you're being deprived of your liberty. You're being taken to jail. You can't use your property. You can't take care of your family. You can't generate revenue. All these things that's protected by the Constitution, you're being denied because someone accused you of something, and you didn't have an opportunity to rebut it in a neutral, unbiased decision maker known as that grand jury. It eliminates it, bypasses it. Now what happens then is that the defendant has to go out and collect evidence to prove that they're innocent. That's well known. Blackstone talks about the trial by affidavit. So when you have an affidavit and you're charged by way of affidavit, your right to confront your accuser evaporates. You are presumed guilty based upon the mere fact of being charged with a crime. And now you have a shift in the burden of proof. Normally, the prosecuting attorney has to prove that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, because you are innocent until proven guilty. That's the way the system is supposed to work. But with information, it is a shift in the burden of proof. No longer does the prosecutor have to prove that you're guilty because you are presumed guilty because of the accusation that came in. So this is a shift in the burden of proof. And so Blackstone, he actually says that this breakdown in due process, it occurs when the system focuses on speed and efficiency as opposed to established procedures and process. We have an absolute breakdown in due process that exists. Blackstone talks about it, and it's in place. Do you need a different cable? Is that working?
Yeah, this one's not working. Hey, everybody, 1 second. I know y'all.
Let's try this one.
Stay with us, y'all. We're gonna.
Let's try this one here.
Yeah, that was not working. Yeah, that's it.
is that plugged in there? I wonder.
Yeah, hopefully.
Maybe.
You know.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is because this one's working.
I think that was the right one.
Okay, it working now? Okay.
Well, yeah, I got to charge up some because I want to catch this last part of this interview. But I have it. You know what? I got it on this one, so we're good because I can have the editor merge it together. So.
But just so you guys understand. So what happened was the Supreme Court of the United States in 1833. There was a case that came to the United States Supreme Court under the Waite Court. Now, Chief Justice Waite and his court, they were well known to be despicable people, right? They were slave sympathizers. They wanted to advance the slavery institution. We have Chief Justice Waite that stated openly that the 14th Amendment might be on the books forever, but they intend to make it a dead letter. He made the statement that to make a black man and white man eat together would create a whole other type of slavery. You know, he had a desire to proliferate the slavery institution, and as a result, he put into place, his court did, a bunch of really, really bad rulings that we are now seeing the effect of today. But what happened was that in 1884, a case came forward to the Supreme Court called Hurtado versus California. It's Hurtado, Hurtado versus California. And what happened was that the state of California, they said, well, we don't like indictments by a grand jury. We don't want to do that. So they created their own alternative legislation in their inferior state constitution that said, we're going to do something different. And they created this concept of information. Now, their thinking was sort of okay. I mean, what they were saying was that if a police officer comes up and finds drugs on you, for instance, and searches you, and it's a lawful search, let's just say that's completely lawful, well, who is accusing you of that crime? Well, that would be the officer. Well, that officer works for the state, so the state can't be both accuser and judge in the same cause, and as a result, they couldn't have the officer be your accuser. They had to create a new accuser, and that accuser became information. So in order for the state to accuse you of something, they need an intermediary there because it can't be the state accusing you of a crime. A police officer can't represent the very same body of men that's judging you, right? And so as a result, the state of California created this other concept called information. What came to the Supreme Court of the United States, Hurtado did, and challenged it, said, I'm entitled to this indictment by a grand jury because the Constitution says it. The Supreme Court said, oh no, the state of California doesn't do it. It's okay that they don't do that. They can do information. What happened there was that the Supreme Court of the United States, through a judicial ruling, sided with an inferior state constitution and amended the Constitution of the United States of America by removing the fundamental protections of the indictment by a grand jury. So the Supreme Court of the United States is the reason why we have this in place today, because the Supreme Court of the United States, under a horrible, horrible train wreck of a court under Chief Justice Waite, decided that the state of California doesn't have to follow the Constitution of the United States and amended the fundamental rights of the people through judicial fiat and a ruling that they erroneously called case law. And then these states, including Washington, decided to rely upon that judge-made ruling that was erroneously called law, that removed the fundamental rights of the people in the Clause 1 Amendment 5, placing their ruling at the foundation in its place, and directed all the states that they can follow this judge-made ruling.
Wow. I believe.
The Supreme Court has no authority whatsoever to amend the Constitution of the United States. We started with that. Any amendment to the Constitution must be done in accordance with the special amending procedure of Article 5. Any other way would be an unconstitutional amendment to the Constitution. Judicial branch, you are not included within the special amending procedure of Article 5 in any way. Supreme Court of the United States, you have no authority to put your ruling in as the foundation and then direct all these states that they can follow your ruling in violation of the Constitution of the United States. Furthermore, judges cannot legislate. Again, that goes back to our very first, the beginning of this conversation. The legislative branch does all legislation. All law is created by them. So, Supreme Court of the United States, when your predecessors that we have to call honorable, who were actually quite despicable, put into place an amendment to the Constitution to remove the fundamental protections of the people so you can put your slavery institution on the fast track by removing the one thing that protects the people from enslavement into your system, I'm going to say that what you've done is absolutely treasonous. right? And what you've done is absolutely unconstitutional. And every single state that decided to rely upon your judge-made ruling to create their inferior state statutes also has now acted unconstitutionally. I don't care how long you've been doing this. I don't care how many times it's been done. You guys started this, Supreme Court. You guys are going to fix this, and we're going to hold you accountable for the things that you've done to destroy our nation and undermine the laws of the United States.
Antonella, that was, I believe that everything we talked about, I believe that you really brought it home, okay? And you began to dissect the profile of those judicial officials and that official that was the author of what we know to be that constitutional breach. And not only did that individual, that the justice, not only did they take on the legislative responsibility, created case law that would, quote unquote, supersede the Constitution, that now states now go by a justice's perspective on a case versus the founding Constitution that was made to govern. And the very point of the Constitution is to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And now we see that it actually happened.
Yeah.
And
again, of the first 28 Supreme Court justices that served on the United States Supreme Court, 22 of them own their own slaves. So 22 of them own their own slaves. And if we've been under this belief, this fallacy, this lie, that judges create law, and that those judges' case law determines the future of our nation, or the direction that our nation goes, then we wonder why we are enslaved right now today, because the foundation that judges unconstitutionally, erroneously, illegally, and treasonously put into place is not the law, but it's based upon the desires of 22 people that own their own slaves.
Exactly.
The foundation is based upon the desire to protect slave owners' property, and then we wonder why we have 800% increase in the prison population, or 16 times more slaves here in America than Mexico's industrialist nation.
And it's no way, like I said, we're bringing this home now. We're bringing this home for everybody. I think you've articulated very well. I believe I like when you dug into the history of, because that was what I was going to get to. How did this happen? And you've been very clear about the justices and their owning of slaves and their mentalities, their mindsets, their little crafty way to create a case law that superseded law of the land. It's very important. The work that you do is very important, because your aim is to attack that corruption and restore liberty and restore the Constitution in its entirety to all people to partake of it. Right. I have a question for you, Mr. Downing. Yeah. My question to you is this, and I believe we both know the answer to this, but we're going to ask it just for the sake of it. When it comes, we talked about a lot of, according to statistics, there's many individuals that are incarcerated that are innocent. In the event that they had their full constitutional rights, meaning that the grand jury was given to them to exercise, and they had their full constitutional rights, those innocent people, do you believe that if they got all of their rights, that they may not have been incarcerated to this day? They may not have been sentenced and serving hellacious sentencing, being innocent, if they would have got the full entirety of their rights, maybe.
100%.
I agree.
100%. Today, more than 78% of people in prison are there on something related to drug offenses. That's not a dangerous person. That's a hurting person. That's a person that has been hurt. A child that has grown up with trauma because of the destruction of the family as a result of these disgusting, despicable acts of these honorable predecessors that the Supreme Court is now protecting, right? That I'm trying to fight. That's not dangerous people. That is hurting people. And you treat hurting people differently than you would treat dangerous behavior. I understand that there's people that are a danger to our society. That's what our justice system is for, is to protect us from people that are a danger, right? But 78% of them are not a danger. 78% of them needs to go to a hospital and be treated for the trauma that's been inflicted upon them, just like any other person deserves to be treated for the trauma that's been inflicted upon them, right? Of the remaining after the 78, every single criminologist in the world, and I'm not going to say that I'm an expert, but I have a master's in forensics as well, and so I would say that I'm certainly qualified. That did come from the most expensive university in the United States, and I'm going to say that most criminologists here in America, they all agree that only about 4% of our prison population is a danger to society. Only 4%, right? So from 78 to 96, that is property-related offenses, right? That is burglaries, thefts, those sorts of things. That's not dangerous behavior either. That's aberrant behavior, right? You deal with aberrant behavior differently than you would deal with dangerous behavior. Aberrant behavior, what you do is you help give them a life so that they have the things they need so they don't have to go out and steal those things. That would mean that 96% of our current prison population shouldn't be there. And yet we're fed this lie of this institution that is proliferating this crime and trauma because we're taking hurting people, right, that are looking for an artificial mechanism so that they don't hurt anymore, right, so that they can feel happy because it's normal human temperament to want to be happy. So when we're unhappy, we seek that artificial mechanism to find happiness. That's how it is, right? And as a result, we are taking hurting people and we're putting them into a more hurtful situation and expecting them to get healed. And that's never going to work, right? That's not how it works. So we've got to, and this is certainly the argument that I have, is that we've got to stop looking at what people do. Because when we look at what people do, all that we see is a person needs to pay for the things they've done. We see that monster that the system tells us to look at. But when we look at what was done to them, long before that crime, as a child, as a husband, as a mother, then we see that something tragic happened to this person and it changed the trajectory of their life and it wasn't their fault. And now we want to help them. Now we want to heal them. We can continue to buy into this argument, this lie, this image of a monster that the system created, or we can say, no, I'm going to look at this child who was hurt, whose family was destroyed because of a system that believed that they can use an arbitrary allegation and presume that the parents are unfit, and we're going to steal this child and hurt this child and abuse this child, and as a result, we're going to look at that point, we're going to say, no, state, you're not going to do this to our children any longer. Because that monster that you create is not the child that the mother and father created. We're going to bring these children back to that point. We're going to heal them. We're going to look. And there's a lot of nations that we can look to as examples for exactly this. Great example is the nation of Israel. They have a community there known as the kibbutz. And the kibbutz is such a peaceful community that if you are sentenced or if you commit a violent crime in the nation of Israel, they sentence you to go and live within the kibbutz. That is your sentence because it's so peaceful that you learn how to be peaceful because a man is simply a product of the environment that he's in. If we live in an environment where we have criminals leading us that are committing sexual deviance by flying out to Epstein Island or by robbing from the Social Security Administration so that they can steal children, right? So that they can feed into the system or so that they can funnel money to Ukraine. If we're going to live in a society that is led by criminals, then don't be surprised that the people become a product of that environment that our leaders are creating. The same can be said for the man individually. So if we want to correct the abusive behavior, get that person out of the abusive environment and let's put him into an environment where we can care about him, we can heal him, because the issue of morality is not a matter of punishment, it's a matter of public health. And we need to switch this because there's lots of nations that went a completely different direction than us. We decided to hurt our people, whereas Denmark, Israel, Norway, they all decided to heal their people. And I'm going to tell you right now, Sweden right now today is shutting down its last prison. They don't even own a prison anymore because they chose to heal their people as opposed to hurt them. So there's a much better way to do this.
Tony, as I've been saying, and I agree with you, one thing that you highlighted was that when an individual goes to prison, one thing that's not talked about is the PTSD that they come out with. Because we know that most people don't have any sympathy or empathy for anything that happens on the other side of those walls. And there's a whole system of brokenness there. That's a topic for another day. But I want to focus on we talked a lot about the rehabilitation of the people and creating those avenues and resources for them to get the proper help they need to heal, whether that's the damage from childhood to stability. Sometimes the answer to problems is just stability and resources. Sometimes it's just knowledge and understanding and mentorship. But there is a complex level of deep PTSD that I've spoken to many incarcerated individuals that were, served their time and got out. And the mentality, the mindset, they're happy to be out and they're trying to acclimate back into society. But you hear the stories that happen, and it shouldn't look like that. You watch the deaths that they saw on the inside, and it shouldn't be like that. I spoke with somebody very influential in the recent past, and we're talking about prison, and talking about the concept of prison. And there was a family, that reached out to me of a mother that whose son he lost his life in prison. And the young man was very young he was a very young man. He had a 5-year sentence, and he was on 3 or 5, so he had 2 more years to complete. And he lost his life there because of the violence that was there, and after reporting that he needed help and things, he didn't get it. And that mother lost her child. Yes, we're talking about a prisoner, but that young man made a decision when he was early on in his life, and now he's gone forever. He has a child and a family. The brutality that happens there is not talked about enough. But bottom line, the PTSD that comes out of prisons is intense.
More than 2,000 people died in the Alabama prison system last year alone.
Jesus.
That's one single state. More than 2,000 people died, lost their life in an institution that was there to protect them and take care of them. And yet more than 2,000 people lost their life within that prison system. We have prisoners that were sent home last year missing organs after they died. And, God has this way of making me so that I'm not so shocked when I come to understand it. But the first thing I thought of when I read that particular news report that the family had produced as a result of this person coming home after he passed away, young 23-year-old man, and he was missing organs. The first thing that was put into my heart was, how much will a billionaire pay for a new heart? Their Alabama Department of Corrections, because that's a real legitimate question that I think that we have, and it's sad. But yeah, so more than 2,000 people lost their lives in one single prison system just last year alone. That's not protecting them. But what I used to do before I went into this, I was in national security, and so when I left the military back in 2004, I went into intelligence, and I worked with intelligence briefly. But and so I came to know Guantanamo Bay quite well, and so. What we were doing was we were employing certain deprivation tactics there. A deprivation tactic is a tactic that is intended to mess with you physically, sexually, emotionally, because we're using them as a mechanism to get you to comply with our desired results. It's an act of terrorism. So we ourselves were committing terrorism on these individuals, these enemy combatants that we were putting down there in Guantanamo Bay. Because honestly, we believed, because we had the information that someone told us that they were terrorists. So as a result, we found them and we presumed that they were terrorists. We would take them and lock them up and put them into this institution in Guantanamo Bay, and we would hold them there and put them through these tactics that would mess with them. And we kept those tactics in place until such time as they finally would admit that they were what we said that they were. And when they would finally admit that, then we would take them in front of a single judge advocate general, a single judge that would declare them guilty in this sham process that we would compare to a plea bargain here in America, right? So what was happening there was that hindsight now, today, we can look at Guantanamo Bay, and we know that the majority of the people that we sent to Guantanamo Bay, they were not a prisoner when they got there. But every single one, they weren't a terrorist when they got there, but every single one of them was a terrorist when they left there because of the deprivation tactics that we were employing upon them. So when you put a human being into a high stress situation, you lock them up with no light, you put them in little boxes, you take away their food, you take away their livelihood, you tell them you are actually making them become the very object that you say that they are. So our own intelligence agency was creating these people to become the very object that they claim that they are, so that they could go out and justify their war on terror, right? This was what we were doing. It's an honest, truthful thing that we all need to be aware of. But the problem is that every single one of those deprivation tactics, with the exception of waterboarding, is employed in every single jail and prison across this country every single day. Every single day. So we're taking people and we're putting them into this extremely dangerous and stressful environment that government is creating because we just know that they're a criminal. We know that you are, and we're going to continue to treat you like that until such time as you will admit that that's what you are. Did it die?
No, but it went off.
Did it say that, what is that, TikTok?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm still over here recording on Facebook.
I'm going to say, as we're coming.
No, it's probably they didn't like some of the things I'm saying. They haven't liked this discussion.
I was about to say, I can only imagine.
About it.
It'd be so funny. That's why I bought the external cameras out.
But
I already know.
So I'll just finish right here then on it, is that we employ those exact same deprivation tactics every single day in every single jail and prison across this country, right? And we do that in order to justify this war on crime, right? And so when you put people into an abusive environment, which is a very high stress, it is a natural human response to become more aggressive. So we take these people and we put them into these high stress environments where they're afraid, and we take all this from them and we mess with them physically, sexually, emotionally by guards and we do these things because we just want them to admit that they are what we say that they are. You're a criminal. We know you are. Just admit it. And until you're ready to admit it, we're going to hold you here and so on. And that environment actually creates the abusive, aggressive individual. Because that's the natural human response to such environments. That's why you don't go to prison to become a better person. You go to prison to become a better criminal. That's extremely well known, and that is a psychological manipulation that we were employing during the global war on terror, that we're employing right now today in every single jail and prison, and it's got to stop.
No, we appreciate that insight, man, coming from someone you heard very personally, and we can see the parallels. So I want to begin to wrap up a little bit, okay? We covered a lot of stuff, Snow. We talked about how, with the Constitution, how it's been, quote unquote, changed to benefit government or states, okay, versus protect the people. We talked about the grand jury indictments. We got into CPS a little bit, talking about how that process is similar. We talked about the protection of children and how there should be resources and programs to keep the familial family together. We discussed history, talking about how when that breach happened, when the Constitution was quote unquote altered by, or quote unquote changed by force by the judicial branch versus not by justices that were practicing corruption and slave owners and things like that, versus going through the avenue of a true constitutional, United States constitutional change. One thing I believe as we begin to land this plane, we talked about a lot of things today, but we can sit, we talk issues all day about all these things that's happening, but the one thing why you have my respect, right, is the fact that you actually do something about it, okay? I want you to talk to us. This is going to be the last point that we're going to get into. I want you to talk to us, all right? Talk to us about what happened in Tulsa when it was two judges, okay? I believe I saw this on Fox News, and it was you began to take action to try to set this right and pursue remedy on behalf of millions of people. So therefore, you began to put your pen and your action and your heart to work for the American people. Tell me about what happened in Tulsa. What's going on there? What happened? Why Tulsa? Why these judges? And where are we at there?
Yeah. Well, the easy response is why Tulsa? I had never been to Tulsa, Oklahoma prior to, what was it, late 2003. I went there for the first time then, and really what I had just filed with the United States Supreme Court, the writ habeas corpus, the one that we're litigating here.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what had happened was that the Supreme Court clerk refused to docket it. And I wasn't gonna fight with the clerk, right? Because when they did that, I just came to understand that, ultimately, why am I going to ask criminals to stop committing crimes? Why am I going to play by the rules of a system that doesn't adhere to their own rules? So I knew that I needed to go out and start raising awareness with the public because the battle's fought in the opinion of the public. So I'm not going to return to the Supreme Court again until I know that I have sufficient momentum to be able to not allow them to ignore this, because that's the only play they have. It's just ignore it, pretend like they don't know, and not address it. So I needed to get out and start traveling this country. I've been back and forth across this country now probably, I think, 26 times now over the last 25 months. So I go coast to coast, and I do what I can to try to raise awareness on this issue in lots of different ways, including serving the attorney generals with notices that their prosecuting attorneys are committing crimes. I've served 47 state attorney generals with notices of just that. Prosecuting attorneys are bringing the incorrect charging instrument, thus committing crime, asking the attorney generals to please correct the unlawful acts of their agents. Right? I've gone back another time. I went through and I served all the state Supreme Courts because they're in charge of all the judges. So if the judges are, holding people over without the correct charging instrument because they're just doing what the prosecutor brings, then that judge is also, engaged in this criminal behavior, this unconstitutional behavior. And so we go to the Supreme Court of the states and say, hey, direct your judges to obey the law. I've gone and I served every single United States senator, almost every single United States congressman, where we've gone through, we've done rallies, we've done training programs, we've, on and on and on. What we're doing now is we're actually going through and we're serving county commissioners and city councils, because if the police are arresting people unconstitutionally because they have been trained to use information, not indictment, well, they're just doing what they were taught to do, right? And so, but the problem is that the city is paying for those police officers to do their job. And if those police are committing a crime, then that means that the city is paying for those crimes to be committed. In emoluments violations, when you pay someone to break the Constitution, you can't do that. You can never pay someone to break the law. So we're going to city councils during their public hearings, and we're informing them that these police officers whom you pay are all breaking the law, and you must do something to correct this behavior. And if you don't, then you guys become complicit in the criminal conspiracy as well. We're going to county commissioners because they pay for the sheriffs who are executing unconstitutional warrants because the judge relied upon the prosecutor who relied upon a state statute. So now they're implicated in it, because if the sheriff is executing a warrant that's unconstitutional and they're paying for the sheriff's department, then the county commissioners are now implicated in it. They're also taking people that they've now kidnapped, putting them into a county jail and holding them there, and the county is paying for that as well. So we're informing the people that are actually paying the bills now to inform them that they are committing these crimes because they're paying for the crimes to be committed. But the reason why Tulsa was, when I went to Tulsa, history is always written by those who win. And so I didn't know anything about Tulsa. And guys, I know a lot about American history. I mean, you guys should know. I've read every single presidential memoir. I've read almost all of the memoirs of the Supreme Court justices. I know American history extremely well, especially of the Gilded Age and slightly post-Gilded Age, because of all of the books that I've read to try to understand these situations. But there's something that I never, ever knew, and I wouldn't have known until I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Because 9/11, regardless of whether you think it was a white hat operation, that wasn't the first terrorist attack here on domestic soil. There was one that came along before that, and I didn't know anything about it. And it happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as Black Wall Street. We had a bunch of our brothers who were doing phenomenally, who were creating their own monetary-based system and extremely successful within the parameters of a society that had held them down in a state of oppression for hundreds of years, and they were doing quite well, and our own government didn't like that. And as a result, our government came in and killed a lot of them, bombed the city of Tulsa, Black Wall Street. And so when I came in and I learned about this, and I actually walked through the Greenwood area, which is the Tulsa area, and I went into the AME Church, which was the only building left standing after the Black Wall Street bombing. I was taken in there by the pastor, and she took me down in the basement, and I got to put my hands on the beams, the structure beams that were there, and you could still see the accelerants that were dripping down, that had dripped down the beams and actually, eaten up the beam itself, eaten into the metal. This was the only building that was left standing. And in this room, there were something like 400 people that didn't know whether they were going to live or die, that had hunkered down in this building to try to survive. And again, it was the only building that was left standing. And so, it became one of those things where, it is, and understanding my history, right? National security. I spent half of my life fighting on behalf of our government because I bought into this notion of national security. I believe that we need to protect our government from the people. And so as a result of 9/11 and those tragic events that happened on 9/11, we had a bunch of knee-jerk overreactions as a society. And we started compromising our rights in the name of security, right? We started accepting and buying into this notion that yes, I want my right to bear arms, but that person over there doesn't deserve to have theirs. Or I want the right to be able to speak, but these people over here, we don't want them to speak. And we started compromising the very values that makes America worth fighting for, right? Because in our ignorance, in our fear, in all of these things that happened as a result of 9/11, it caused us to do these major deprivations of rights and started compromising our values and principles. And that's where we started to see a massive erosion of the Constitution for the United States of America and a ramp up of a system that is absolutely going to enslave every single man, woman, child before it's over. So understanding where I came from, when God opened up my eyes and showed me that I was on the wrong side, I had no choice but to step up and to start acting to correct those things that I myself put into place in my ignorance. You do not protect the government from the people. You protect the people from the government. I was on the wrong side, and I needed to get my perspective and my vision corrected because the people needed the help that I had. I spent half my life high up in government designing solutions and technology. I made $870,000 a year doing it. I was paid a fortune, but I was doing the wrong thing. Because terrorism is defined as the use or threat of use of fear in order to bring about a desired result from one organization to another organization. It is a shame that our global war on terror has entered into our own borders and so dramatically impacted our own citizens as a result of some of the things that I myself was involved in, engaged in, deploying and producing. And I have no choice but to fix those things and to try to bring about those colleagues that I had in the past to the same understanding that national security is nothing more than code word for domestic terrorism. So we have to fix this. So Tulsa, the reason why Tulsa is because that's where terrorism started, and I wanted to show end to end what we've been doing to our own people from 9/11 to Tulsa. And so when I chose to file this, or when God led me to do it, we decided we were going to start this in Tulsa. Of course, we brought the case up out of Washington State. Washington's the primary respondent, but we really brought in the attention from within Tulsa because we have a whole group of people here that deserve to be free, who George Washington said should be free, and who the American people believe are free, and yet they've never been given such an opportunity. So it is our responsibility to be men and women of honor, do the things that we say that we will do, and produce this system that we have been promised. And that means that it will be for all men, regardless of whether they're black or white, whether they're male or female, whether they are young or old, no matter where they choose to reside within the jurisdiction of the United States. Every single person must be entitled to every single right secured by and enumerated in the Constitution, regardless of any other societal parameters or conditions that would be placed by government. Government's not in the business to decide who the laws protect and who they don't. So that's fine.
Hey, it's awesome, man. As far as Tulsa, we know Tulsa is very historic, and we talked about the incident happened at Black Wall Street, and history is documented, and I believe now history is documenting a different kind of chapter with what you're doing in Tulsa. As we begin to get ready to come to the close on this, in your filings in Tulsa, it was put in your filings that you were calling for the arrest of 2 judges that were allegedly acting unconstitutionally based off the fact that they were following ulterior standards, for lack of a better term, versus constitutional law of the land, the supreme law of the land mandate. And they were judges that were doing a lot of what we've been talking about, harming families, not operating under the constitutional obligation that their oath of office is actually to, right? Tell me a little bit about when you file. Tell me a little about your filing, and then you just give us just a brief understanding of what the filing. And we know 2 judges were implicated in that filing. Is that correct?
Yes. Let me go ahead and say first off, my desire is not for anybody to be sent to prison. I'm not mad at anybody. I'm not coming after anybody. I want us to fix this problem. But the way we fix the problem is by stepping up and doing the right thing. And if you are shown that what you are doing is criminal, if what you're shown that what you're doing is unlawful, then you have a choice. You can either turn from your unlawfulness and choose to act in a lawful manner, or 2, you are knowingly and willingly engaging in criminal behavior that is undermining the laws of the United States and in a position of authority, which is not a very good place for you to be, because we all know what that crime is. So what I'm saying here is that there isn't a single judge in this country that is not committing that exact same crime. I've proven it to you. I've served 37 state Supreme Courts with notices. This is what the Constitution of the United States says. This is what your obligations are. And you've had a year to fix it, a year to do something. And not only have you done nothing, but you've acted in a completely frivolous manner, continuing to do it despite your awareness, and not even beginning or attempting to correct such behavior. There isn't a single attorney in this country, right? Because you've all been trained to follow judge-made rulings. You've all been told that that is what the law is. The judges make the law because of an English judicial philosophy that's permeated its way here into America. And this is not a nation where judges make the law, right? You must understand that here in America, we did not delegate the authority to the judiciary to create law. And if you can't grasp that, attorneys, if you can't wrap your head around that, attorneys, then you're not going to be in a very good position as I continue to move forward, right? For all you prosecutors, you have a job to ascertain truth. You have a job to administer justice, not win a case for your client, the accuser. So the problem is that I've informed every single one of you, attorney generals, prosecutors, all of you, every single one of you are committing crimes, right? Crimes that are capital, crimes that are punishable by death as prescribed by law. And all I'm saying is that there comes a point in time when you got to make a decision, because I can't keep any one of you from exercising power. But what I can do is I can draw a line in the sand, and I can show you this is what the law states. You guys are clearly operating outside of that. And you can choose to return to established rule of law and work with me to fix this problem. Or 2, you are going to be shown as the traitors that you are, and it's going to be up to the people to decide what is going to happen to you at that point in time, right? All that I can do is present to the people of the United States the evidence in the most truthful manner, right? That's favorable and equal for both sides. But there's going to come a point in time when you will not be given the luxury or the convenience of being able to return to the law, because the people will have learned the true nature of your criminality, right? I'm not going to stop. This is not going to go away. You are not going to continue to oppress the people of the United States because of your own error. The people didn't do this. You did this. All of you geniuses and law experts, none of you ever understood the law. And as a result, that's not an expert in the law. That's a criminal.
Exactly.
So what I'm saying here is that I would welcome any one of you, judges, to come and work with me, right? If you believe in this country, if you are honorable in nature, right? If you believe that you are not a criminal, then you've got to act in a lawful manner. And if you don't, then I don't have to tell you what you are. You're going to show it by your actions, right? So yes, there is a request for indictments in what I submitted. But both of those judges can choose to do the right thing, can choose to act in a lawful manner, can mitigate their criminality, and I would welcome them to come and help me fix this problem. But if you don't, you know what the outcome's going to be, right? Because you know the evidence that I have against you, right? And that's going to go for every single one of you judges, because the evidence I have against them is the same evidence I have against you. All that I have to do is show that you had a constitutional obligation and you refused to fulfill that constitutional obligation, and as a result, you have committed the crime of treason, and that treason is punishable by death as prescribed by law.
Wow. Whew. Noah, hey man, we've had an amazing interview today, man. How you've taken us through so much, man, and taken us through everything from history to breaches of constitutional alignments that, and I really appreciate your time, man, because I believe you highlight a lot of things, man. When it comes to the elected, to our governing body of officials, they're held to higher standard. They should understand and support and hold the Constitution based off their oath of office more closer than anyone, because they're the implicators of it in real time against to the people. So I love what you're doing. I love for the fact that not only we hear people talk about corruption in government, judges doing this, we hear about this, but everybody, you're looking at a man here, right, that as a Washington, D.C. civil rights advocate and litigator is now already done the work in the framework of notifying the nation of what's happening, right? Already is filed in Tulsa. We talked a little bit about what's the historic context of Tulsa. We know Tulsa and why it was chosen ultimately to take D.C. down, because in reference to this case, because this is constitutional. It is American. It is right. And everybody, if you know Tanoa Downing and you know this case and you know what's happening here, we all have to get behind him. I myself am aligning to Tanoa Downing and his team, because what they're doing is restoration. I love the mission behind it, the vision behind it, and above all, under God, the damn United States Constitution says it, and we all, including those in power, should follow it. It is a supreme law of the land, and it should never have been altered, changed. We got into it a little bit. If we dissect when it was changed by those justices and by those individuals, we'll begin to learn a lot about their profiles, their identities, who they were, their belief system. We'll realize that, man, it started out, the foundation was broken in that moment, and I truly believe that. And we got a man here in his team that's going after fixing it. So, man, Tanoa Downing, man, I appreciate, man, you letting me be here today and interview with you, man. We love your work, what you're doing, man. Keep it up, brother. Keep this up, man. And you have my support and a lot of people that support me. I'm asking them to do the same. We want to know, Tanoa, you have had to travel. You've left a very, very high-paying government job to advocate for the people, and obviously we know that that's not the same. You don't get paid to do this. Essentially, you're doing this out of what God has called you to do. How can people support you and what you're doing? What are ways to give? How can we help you? How can we support you? What does your mission need? We know it needs for notoriety and publicity. If you are content creators, I behoove you, please understand the dynamics of what he's doing and the nature of what he's doing. Because once you have an understanding and gain gravity into it, you're like, oh my God, if this can be breached, imagine how much further things can go. And I believe if we go back and fix this foundational issue, it won't fix the world and everything. I'm not going to say it's going to fix everything, Alex, no, but it's going to put us in the right direction. Right?
We're just talking about a problem.
Absolutely. It's a conversation. When the government and the people begin to have a really real conversation to what the betterment of all of us and what needs to happen, that's something that should be a normality. So back to what I was saying. So tell us, how can we support you? What are your platforms? What is your ways to give? What do you need? Where, like, how? Talk to us about that as we close out.
So just like Derrick said, I don't get paid for things I do. 9 years ago, when I left national security and the work that I was doing, I decided to go into litigation full time. I knew back then that these 2.9 million prisoners didn't have money. I can't expect them to give me something that they don't have. They're already enslaved. And these children that are being taken from their families, they don't obviously have any money. If your rights are being taken from you, it's because you're poor, right? No other reason. So, there isn't money to go around. And so for many years now, 9 years, I've done this because I knew that there wasn't going to be money in it. So in the past, my measure of being a man was based upon things I had, right? I made a lot of money and I could do just about anything, but that was not a good place for a man to be. I started looking at myself, I started questioning myself, and I started saying, because I had a son at that time. He was probably 8 years old. He was eight because it's been 10 years since I've seen her talking to either of my kids. But I knew back then that if I'm going to be proud of the man that my son becomes, I must first be proud of the man that he emulates. So if I want to set the example for my son, I must go out there and be a man that would be worthy of his admiration. And I also knew that if my daughters were going to look to me as an example of who it is that they should marry or the type of man that they should marry, then I need to be the type of man that I would approve for them. So this is an opportunity for me to be able to set that example for my children, to show them this is what a husband and a father does. This is how you need to be, children. And so that's been, a big part of my driver. But I've made a lot of promises to a lot of families, a lot of children that I won't take another paycheck until I get their loved ones home, because I don't want to focus on what I have. I want to focus on what I do, because a man can't be proud of the things he's called, but rather by the things that he does. I used to be called a lot of different things, but I was failing in all those things that I was called. So today, what I'm doing right now is I'm stepping up and I'm saying that I don't get paid, but through that not being paid, we do operate by donation only, and that way I can focus on the service that I'm providing, provide the best service to all of you. And if you like the service I'm providing, then you guys will make sure that I have the things that I need, and you guys will always came through. It's amazing what you guys do. So thank you so much. We have Cash App, Chime, Venmo, PayPal, and they're all exactly the same. It's We Shall Be Free. That's WESHALLBEFREE. We shall be free. And honestly, you guys have made sure that I have everything I need. We haven't been without. I don't have money for retirement accounts or orthodontics bills or whatever, but you guys have made sure that I always have a place to sleep and I always have food to eat. And I thank you guys so much for everything you've done, and continue to offer those blessings. Understand that there are a lot of scammers out there, a lot of fake accounts for myself and for Jessica as well. We have no other Cash App, Chime, or Venmo, PayPal. They are all exactly the same. We shall be free. If anybody contacts you asking for money, understand I don't do that. The only time I ask is here on these videos. I will never contact you asking for money, and no one has to pay me to do the things I'm doing. I'm going to do it because these 2.9 million prisoners, they need the help, and they need someone like me to do the things I'm doing, and they can't pay anyone else to do it. So we're going to get this done regardless. And if you do donate, then you can understand that maybe you're donating for someone that can't, because they're enslaved in an institution that is profiting off their involuntary servitude. Thank you guys so much.
Hey, it's Noah. We love what you're doing, man. And like he said, there's a deleted scenes of this stuff, and I can say this as somebody that you guys know, I'm in the media pretty heavy, and what we do, the work that we do, advocating for families, you don't necessarily get paid to do this. It's a heart issue, a heart thing that we do. There's it's a compromise. It's something that we don't talk about, the sacrifice it takes to do this right here. So Noah doesn't get here and tell about all the crazy things he has to go through, that he has to deal with, the strain. It could be family strains. It could be all kind of different things, because this work is intense though, So as he said, we shall be free. You guys, please support him. I'm going to be following this story very closely and staying very connected to Noah and his team, and seeing where I can minister more in reference to what he's doing. We support it. Y'all please go to his page and make sure that you guys follow it, share it. This is a case that's groundbreaking in the U.S. and it affects every last one of us, okay? He needs our support. He does not, we need to make sure that we, traveling is very expensive and things like that. We need to make sure that we're supporting him. And you guys know me, I don't ever get on and do the whole, support people and stuff like that. It's very rare that I'm even on. But this is noble. This is honorable. It's something I stand behind 100%. We must hold Judge and the people accountable. So we love you guys. Thank y'all so much for joining us and being tuned in with us. We love y'all, man. To know, brother, it's a blessing, man. I appreciate you so much, man. Keep up the work, man. And we're going to make sure to stand by and support you, brother. So, hey, you guys stay tuned. And, hey, everybody, we shall be free.
Thank you guys so much. God bless.
Bless you.
Thank you.